I'm seating. Thank God. Okay, so a little bit about myself. My name is Jodie Horvath. I'm an agrologist. I recently stepped into an extension role with Ducks Unlimited. I've been with them for at least 12 years now. And as I mentioned, I'm based out of Kelleher, the big metropolis, but I happen to also grain farm and cattle farm there too. So been in the area a very long time, very passionate about agriculture and livestock and what's going on in the landscape around us. So our Touchwood Hills Conservation Ranch is a project that is owned by Ducks Unlimited. It is just north of Cupar, south of Lestock in the Touchwood Hills landscape area. So a lot of relief. As you can see in the picture, lots of deep potholes. Water typically is not an issue for us out there. There is a fairly significant amount of livestock producers in the area. As you can imagine, these hills are probably best suited for forage, but not surprisingly, they have all been worked in the past and everything is tame forage in our piece. So we've got, I think in total, it's close to 6,500 acres in almost a near contiguous block, so it's kind of unique. And it does have annual rotational grazing on the ranch. So we refer to it as our working ranch. It's simply kind of managed a bit different than most of our other conservation lands are. Typically we would do, every 2 year, every 3 year hay or graze on our conservation land. But in this case, we really wanted to see, what if we applied industry accepted standards to our conservation lands, basically combining wetland conservation with accepted agriculture practices. Because the more we understand the issues that ag producers and landowners face, the better we can develop our programs at Ducks Unlimited. And the more perennial cover, ultimately, we can get across the landscape. Pardon me, the landscape. Pardon me. So we do have a couple ongoing trials. One of them is in conjunction with Canadian Forage and Grassland Association, and it's part of Living Labs as well. So we've created an adaptive multi-paddock grazing site. Basically, we wanted to take this half section that was grazed annually. It did get adequate rest. It probably wasn't used maybe quite as much as a typical producer might utilize their forage, so there was a lot more carryover left. But what we were finding is the cattle simply weren't making good overall use. There was areas where they were spending their time, especially around the water. And then leading areas like woody encroachment is an issue we have there. There's a lot of aspen parkland areas. So we're starting to see some of this woody encroachment where the cattle just really preferred not to go. So how can we address those problems? We wanted to look at some targeted grazing, so those woody areas. And we also needed to come up with some water development. Even though, like I mentioned, there's a lot of deep potholes in these areas, some of them were starting to dry up towards the end, and cattle just sort of have their favorite water hole, and that's where they want to be. We also wanted to look at the infrastructure. How do we create this many paddocks? How many miles of fences it's going to take, the labor, the cost. You can go ahead and move that. Who really wants to be moving cattle every day, right? So we looked at a 2 to 6 day move. We created 19 paddocks over this half section. We put in a portable watering system, so it's a solar powered pump and a portable trough system, so that we had a little more control over where the animals could be. And in the last 2 years, we've increased. We started pretty conservative with 50 pair, and had no issues moving to 75 pair. We're finding at the end of this year, they're still not cleaning up the paddocks. So paddocks vary in size from, I think like 9 to 15 acre size. And so at the end of the 2 or 3 day or 6 towards the end of the year, they're still not cleaning up. We've got room for more. So whether we decide to make smaller paddocks, and the producer nearly cried when we talked about fencing more, because it was a huge commitment for them to fence. So we learned a lot about sort of the social aspect of it too, or the commitment it takes to put this infrastructure in place. We're learning lots as we go along. It'll be a continued study. Living Labs, this fit very well into what they were working on, and so they've done a number of different soil samples and different studies, getting information from this half section. So we'll see where it takes us for next year. Something else that we worked on with Living Labs was direct drilling legumes to see if we can rejuvenate some of these older stands. So as I mentioned, we have tame grass. We direct drilled some legumes in, increased the productivity of these grasslands so that they're not being taken out of perennial cover and returned back to crop. It's pretty amazing that where land has sold in the area that was forage and been in grass for a long time, it's very quickly being worked and annual cropped, even with the relief that's in the area. So we trialed spring and dormant, and then we went back to spring seeding again. We tried some stand setbacks using some herbicides, some mowing, all kinds of different things. We worked with Living Labs. This brings in a whole bunch of other collaborators as well. We had a master student do some work out here, working with U of S, and again, just a whole plethora of soil samples and looking at what effect this has across the stand. Were we successful? Well, the germination really seemed to work really well. The establishment, though, we lost a lot of plant that didn't follow through to establishment. A couple of reasons. I think our stands were really quite healthy for being 20 to 25 years old. There was still a fairly high legume component, and so trying to determine what was a new plant compared to a shoot off an older one was really hard. We were also in some times of drought where we had overall we've had a lot of rainfall there, but just the timing of it, right? So these little things germinated, but the older grass was able to take advantage of the moisture, and they probably just dried up. So still learning lots. I have not given up on this. Most of the studies are done right now, but I think there is still a place for this. It's a lot about the equipment and Mother Nature's cooperation, of course. Heard this morning about the saline areas. So with Ducks Unlimited, we know that these marginal areas are an opportunity to put some perennial grass and legumes down, which equals waterfowl habitat for us. It might be hay or pasture for cattle producers, but it also might be just a net zero on your crop, right? These are just some ugly areas. We all know what they look like. But we did create a program called MAP, so Marginal Areas Program, where we do work with producers, try to get them to take up the idea that we heard about this morning, that these areas really are better off in perennial forages, whether you have hay or need them for hay or cattle, they are just better off not being cropped and putting the inputs and costs and time into all of this. So we did work with some drone seeding. The problem with these areas and getting people to seed them down is really that they can't. They're small areas. Sometimes they're a big part of the field, but often they're little corners. And so the challenge was, the person would say, yes, I'd love to put these areas down, but I can't even get in there. My equipment's too big. I don't seed grass. I work with grains more. I'm not familiar how to seed it. All these reasons. So we thought, what if we go in with the UAV? It seems like the perfect answer to getting into these small areas. You can cover a lot of areas quick. One nice thing too is that the equipment does not touch the ground, so you're not sharing equipment from field to field and all the diseases and weed seeds and stuff that go along with it. So we did put in an adopt application with the Saskatchewan Council. Scott Wright from U of S and LFCE. Robert Johnson is a producer that was involved, and ourselves at Ducks Limited. We got 3 sites done this year. We were doing spring and fall. The fall ones are actually being seeded today and tomorrow. we've seen really great, really great results so far. You know, you talk about the spray pattern and everything and the droplets of the spray. We weren't that fussy when we looked at the seed. Yes, we could capture the, you know, where it was bare ground. You could definitely see the pattern. We were happy with it. It was more a situation of, is it better to get it on the ground as opposed to not getting it on the ground, right? It's phenomenal. Like, the stand is just amazing. That's my site at Touchwood. That was after it was mowed. It actually looks really good. The legumes came in, sandfoin and alfalfa both. We also got a really good catch of thistle or rejuvenation of thistle. So yeah, we'll see where that takes us next year. But we did get that not mowed. We hated it, I guess, basically. So yeah, so that's something else we're working on. And this led us to, we're so happy with the success of it, that we created a dormant seeding program. Got salinity and weeds, why don't you get forage? Pretty simple. We offered the producer to go in, broadcast the seed for him via drone. They were responsible for any seed prep and harrowing after. And so far, we had some mixed, I guess we had lots of interest. Sometimes it was a matter of people were interested, they didn't have time to do any field prep though, they weren't prepared to prepare. So they want to revisit it next year. But we have done about 350 acres so far. It's really a learning lesson for us. We just want to know what different field prep needs to be in order for this to be successful. So what do these areas, especially where it's really low lying and quite wet, what do these areas need? Not only before, but after too. So do they truly need to be harrowed in after? Will the freeze thaw have some effect on it? You know, all these things. So now we've got a really good smattering of these seedings all across the parkland area, and we're gonna, you know, follow up with them next year and see where that gets us. Something new that we're gonna be implementing for next year, and it's already begun, is the virtual fence trial. And we're gonna hold this at the Touchwood Hills Conservation Ranch. We don't have cattle ourselves, but we will work with the producer to basically create, I've got 480 acres or so set aside for this trial. I'm looking at 60 cow-calf pairs, and we're gonna see what we can do. So I'd like to make those small paddocks, see if we can get some targeted grazing. It's right next to our AMP site, so it's right next to the multi-paddock site, so we can get some really good comparisons. Perhaps in the future, rather than, if we want to make those AMP, to putting more fencing. There's a lot of to trying this out. And as a conservation company, we look at lands that we own ourselves that maybe aren't conducive to very much fencing, so they're left idled year after year. Probably not best for the stand, not good for, you know, neighboring relations maybe. But using this, it might allow us to get into those areas, manage them effectively to meet our goals, and also to build good relations with some of the neighboring landowners as well. Something else to think about is there's a lot of, obviously a lot of wildlife, and they cause havoc with even the one-strand electric fences out there. So there's constantly moose and elk and deer going through them at the Touchwood Hills Ranch, and I'm sure everywhere else. So what if we could create these paddocks without affecting the wildlife that it's also using, right? And how does that affect how we go forward and create these paddocks? Are we going to be able to make smaller paddocks that maybe we wouldn't normally make, right? Make some decisions that are good for the management of the pasture that normally we would just not bother because either they're too expensive or you know, just setting structure and things. So lots to. I think we're going to hear more. Andre, I think, is going to talk about vents a little bit later. So it's a different company. Yeah, so stay tuned. Lots to learn from this. And that's all I have for the update. I just wanted to, thank you guys for letting me have a quick talk about some of the stuff that we're working on. I'm really glad to see that it does fit really well with our other speakers today. So I will be around, and some of the other GU staff is around. So if anyone has questions, please don't hesitate to seek us out. Good, thank you.
Thank you. Scott Wright, he's going to give an update on the livestock surrender center of excellence. Scott is the director of the LFCE. He has a master's degree in animal science and a PhD in plant breeding from the U of S. And I'm going to turn this over to Scott, and he can take it from here.
Thanks very much. And I think we have officially been arguing with Neil for over 40 years on what it should and shouldn't do. Isn't that right, Neil? What I want to do, we've got about a half hour. What I want to do is bring up some ideas that we've been working through. LFCE, as most of you, 2019, we've been opening the doors. There's animals come into play, but it's built on ideas that have been around since the late 80s and early 90s, quite frankly. We're on track. Double check that we're doing the things that we need to do. In lots of ways, openly, the research done at LFCE is the bailiwick of Greg, and we can go on. Dinesh, the crew, those are the researchers, the structured research get done, and quite frankly, to try and put some of the pieces together. And so LFCE was established on really three pillars. The industry is core and central in that conversation. The university as a provider is absolutely there. The governments and the support that sits there. So you'll see as we wander through this quite quickly, some key sort of conversations. One, we're an enabler to help people do what they're doing, give the researchers an opportunity to do better work, provide some of the integration. When we talk about all the way to we've got the opportunity to start connecting. It's also about connecting across some of those opportunities. Really quick has been running now. It started out as a annual versus perennial grazing systems, soil health and productivity, as a part of that as well, the connection between grazing and that water component. So you want to talk about those kinds of projects that then begin to provide the little component. They're looking at that whole chain, that whole continuity. And so in lots of ways, we talk, we've gone back to some of the fundamental principles of why LFCE was pulled together in the first place. Some like me would argue that goes back before the mid-90s when the Melfort research did. Some go to the demise of the feedlot, taking the feedlot down at the university and pulling that in. Some build the conversations of all of this connecting under one roof, if you will, to be able to provide that connectivity. In the back, and she'll promise you saying nothing, but you know the words are going to come, right? We've had the chance to bring Janice Bruno on to work with us in really working on this engagement and to see what can we do to doing better. Try and move through this process, right? We're responsible to the university. We're responsible to the university. We're responsible for the facility and provide funding for research. We're responsible to the researchers. Gabe's one of my bosses, and if you don't like what you hear up here, complain to him and he can fire me. It's a great deal, right? Good opportunities, and he can fire me. It's a great deal, right? Good opportunities to move our way forward. And so it's all of these connections, research and faculty partners. We also have an advisory board that are representatives of the done in beginning to check in is really start pulling this direction, right? So what we've done in beginning to check in is really start pulling those pieces together. If you're doing something, how are you going to make it live? And so the engagements that we've gone through in trying to create life in this space, the ideas have come together based on the initial principles of LFCE. Janice has kept me absolute rigid to that direction, and making sure that we've checked in on every one of those pieces on the way by. Our advisory board is process to no end that are coming forward. We've sat down with our LFCE management team, those that have gone through the growing pains and see some of both the pains and the opportunities we've got to move forward. We've sat down with producer group associations and said, hey, and are these the right outcomes that we're trying to create? Conversations that need to continue. And Gabe, just for a little bit of clarity, because he's going to come back to this conversation, our funder conversations are about funds that go to LFCE and gaps that we see. opportunities for utilize infrastructure that was already built for 3 years worth of project already and parlay that into something that gives us a ton more information and a way to express that information. I want to be clear when we talk to governments, and for the extensionist folks here, LFCE will never be an extension organization. Our job is to work with you on how to help you move information in that extension, not doing that extension. Isn't that right, Charlie? It's about gluing the pieces together and making it of value to that industry, to those producers, to those who are actually going to put it on the ground. There's where our opportunities come forward. But really where they end up, and I'm going to highlight KPIs specifically for industry, but so you see that whole space a little bit. We have that environmental goods and services sustainability in question. Is that an important thing for the industry? Environmental goods and indigenous relations. Right? We have the largest land base for the university. We have a bison herd that's a critical part of culture and development. So a great opportunity for us to engage on behalf of the university, First Nations, and create some of that space and opportunity. In the middle, that's an opportunity. In the middle, that's the really important stuff. That's the stuff that you should get excited about, right? And what we've done in going through this conversation is a little bit of, and you know things that are created by committees. Word that says we do research. But oh no, a committee can't let that sit with just one word, right? So now we have the expanded discovery to help producers answer the questions that are most important to them now and fundamental component for us. Increased focus on research techniques and absolute areas of priorities that they were responsible to facility. And I can tell you that the researchers have a list longer than your arms in terms of what to be able to continue to move might come out of that, right? We have work and the thin gray wooded research done there. So again, the opportunity to pull information out that makes sense to you, that can be useful for you, priorities, building the connections, having the conversations, being part of groups like this, and Agribition, and CBIC, and SBIC, and engaging in that's got alignment to those priorities, teaching, training, translation of science, putting boots on the ground, grass that have stepped in, walk grass that have stepped in it and kind of gone, whoa, that's what that looks like, right? That team, they're a big part of how we get work done. Tell me that's not. Most of you will know I was one of the early graduate students at Tremonde 100 years ago. Ignition and the first job was 17 miles of barbed wire fence. That was the first job of a graduate student. Good learning? Oh yeah. Some of the best and participate in as part of LFCE. Young leaders and part of future directions, and you'll see youth and young leaders coming out very clearly because openly of grad students and students in as part of LFCE. Young leaders and part of future directions, and you'll see youth and young leaders coming out very clearly because openly of grad students, now they're going to be the deputies, and they're going to be in Marianne. 15 years from now, they're going to be the deputies, and they're going to be in Marianne's position making decisions on what research gets done. It's critical that they be a part of the process and a part of what goes on. Training, where focus is it? She was already up here. If you're not on, right, sets, there's key. We want a simple one. What's the non-content based awareness? How do you make people aware of what's happening in this space? How do you contribute to that? So for us, in a number of spaces, again, really dragging that knowledge and that opportunity up. General knowledge of activities, relationships with partners, the opportunity we had to bring producer associations together in the same room. Just a little conversation around this stuff, right? Having these conversations. And yes, we had the same conversation with the stock growers about 3 weeks later. They're committed to be back again. That opportunity to just put those pieces together. Collaborative research efforts, continuing our way through. And so there's a number of pieces around this that, again, we've put in place. We've tried to build. The youth is always a great one. Our strategic advisory board, that discussion. When we do the field day, how many of you have not? There's a lot of hands here. I'm going to be real cranky. My staff, fund a whole team, including a pile of those students in terms of what they want to show off. Their opportunity to kind of pull this forward. Another big Forage tour on Sunday afternoon, that opportunity again to engage the industry and bring them forward as a result of that. Facility, how many of you were at CBIC this year? We were a part of that. That was an opportunity to bring that here. And so this organization is an, quite frankly, but just enable the ability side. And I started with that conversation to start with. Tell me you're not lambasted by that conversation. We got to do school tours this spring. Fascinating conversation for a bunch of grade 5s to start out saying, cattle farts are bad. Right? It's that creating that awareness all the way through the conversation from the bottom up and adding a little bit of science in terms of what that space really begins to look like. Expanding the sustainability conversations. It tends to show up in a huge team of researchers and a little opportunity that's kind of just emerged. Someone, a graduate student that came through LFCE, Gabe, you're a grad student, it's support to travel, to look at what data, information, and opportunity we create in this very opportunity for collaboration and further development conversation. Right? Opportunities, again, exactly these things. Provide research data and results that validate that sustained conversation. Focus on future efforts. What are the gaps in research? What are the opportunities for further outreach? What are the opportunities to continue to work on those sustainability pieces? And then finally, and really quickly, this space entry. What a fascinating conversation of critters. What do you think? And so most of you know this. I'm kind of a pasture guy. I'm a grass guy. That's what gets me really excited. What do bison prefer? What do they want to graze? What do you think the science-based answer to that is? What do bison select for? Same thing that cows do? Select for fiber. Right? So that conversation on what a good pasture is for bison is almost 180 degrees from what we do in cattle management. Right? 300 years ago, that was an animal. 300 years ago, that was an animal. Again, huge opportunities for us to be working at that interface and understanding the original document, the revised document. Janice has it at the back. If you would just wave for a moment, right? And you're welcome. If you want an email copy, we'll send it to you. Comments from what you've heard, comments from what you read, please, 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 please bring them back to Janice or I, right? Happy to jump in on the research side, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Well, Chelsea gets.
I should have that power. So that